Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for being with us here in the room and to everyone online. My name is Rory O'Neill. I'm a health reporter at POLITICO, and you are very welcome to this panel on whether Europe can be a world leader in pharma. The context for this discussion is that Europe's once enviable position in life sciences is slipping away. Pharma companies increasingly go to China and the US to carry out clinical trials, while promising research is often lost overseas, where startups have better access to capital and a quicker route to market. Health Commissioner Oliver Varhelyi has made it clear that restoring Europe's flagging life sciences competitiveness is his #1 priority. To do that, he's overseen a slew of legislative proposals aiming to make the industry more competitive. And the question we're going to be considering today, among others, is whether it's enough what the Commission has proposed for Europe to lead the world's pharma market, and what trade-offs we might have to think about. So to help me do that, I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by a highly expert panel. We have Pádraig Ward, Head of Roche Pharma International. We have Marco Marcella, Acting Deputy Director General for Health and Director of Digital, EU for Health and Health Systems Modernization at DG Santé. We have Valentina Stramelio, Interim Executive Director of the European Patients Forum. And finally, we have Guido Razzi, an advisor to the Italian Minister of Health and a former Executive Director of the European Medicines Agency. Thank you all so much for being with me. I'm very happy to be here with you for this panel. I'm going to start with a question for all of you. Pádraig, you're immediately on my right. I'll start with you. What is the biggest problem that we need to solve to realize Europe's potential in life sciences?
I would start by saying we're taking an approach that isn't joined up, that inevitably results in health being thought about as a cost and not as an investment. And as a result of that, we're missing opportunities all over the place. Specifically for pharma, you mentioned it yourself, it's a huge contributor to the European economy. It's 300 billion euros a year we have in. There's 2 million people working in it. It's a major contributor to the trade surplus from the EU. But all of those things are in decline. And it's partly because we're missing a holistic view of the whole system.
Mm-hmm. Marco, what's your thinking on what is the key problem that the Commission is trying to solve?
I guess that it follows from the analysis that you put forward yourself. So in a way, you know, there is no doubt that in general, life science, biotech, they are strategic components of our work. I mean, you know, just even if you go back to the report from Draghi, that is very clear what is the political orientations and the political support that we need. We are very good at doing science. We are very good at creating and nurturing our talents. We do have excellences. Let's say the moving, however, from the science to the medicines in the heads of people has some bumping roads. And I guess that this is where we have intervened, so I can reference some of these activities. We have intervened with a package, but exactly this holistic approach with a package that integrates, say, the support for simplification and innovation, you know, through rules. We have intervened in relation to the supports, financial supports, so the money, and also in creating, say, infrastructural solutions that would help in terms of innovations and therefore in terms of, say, competitiveness. And then, linking with the previous panel, one of this is certainly the fact that the industries access health data for reasons that are related to support innovation.
Yeah. Valentina, you're here representing the voice of the patients. What's your priority when it comes to EU health policy? What do you think the Commission needs to be focusing on?
From our perspective, it's really key making sure that the patient and the people's perspective is not forgotten. So as we are building a new narrative for competitiveness, and I think it's high time for that, we need to make sure that the patient perspective is well integrated, because only by meeting patients' needs, we can truly address the needs of society. And so also making this competitiveness effort really worthwhile.
Yeah, and the tension, or if indeed whether there is a tension between competitiveness and patient interest, access to medicines, that's something that we're going to come back to during the panel for sure. But just before we round off this question, Guido, what do you think is holding back Europe's life sciences industry?
Sorry?
What do you think is holding back Europe's life sciences industry?
Well, I think it's the fragmentation of the market is one of the big things. Some timing, long time for approval, and some uncertainty about timing, not about the outcome. The process, I think, is robust enough. And basically, which also impacted the innovation overall, we don't have a real model for financing. Just as an extreme summary, in US they have a very flourishing venture capital market supporting the crucial segment of research. In China they have a massive input of public money. Here we have to find our way to promote both and to merge to joint effort between public and private effort.
Yeah, Pari, I think you wanted to come in there.
I do. I was just going to come back to what Marco said a minute ago, because I completely agree with you that when we talk about what the European Commission can do, a load of progress has been made and is being made. I think we too often conflate, though, the question of European competitiveness with what the European Commission could or shouldn't do. We also have to figure out what is it that the member states could and should do in order to pull through things from the Commission or create an ecosystem. I hate the word ecosystem, but create an environment in which the industry can thrive. But it's not just the institutions here in Brussels. It's also what happens in the individual 27 member states.
Mm-hmm. Marco, what's your perspective on that? How much is the Commission able to do? Like, the Commission has been very busy in this area. You're working on a lot of stuff, but how far does it get you? Everything that the Commission has proposed, and we can go into detail on some of the files. But how much of this is in the Commission's gift to solve?
Well, the Commission intervenes in the areas where it can intervene. Mm-hmm. And in terms of healthcare, where we can and where we cannot intervene. In this area, we have made a significant package, say towards the end of 2025, and I would say not only the new piece of initiatives that we launched, say on the 16th of December, for instance, but also the fact that some days before that date, we concluded collectively with the councils and the parliament the negotiations over the Pharma package. The political agreement was reached. So what we can do is certainly articulated around probably two messages that we have already heard. Realizing where in the legislations there are simplifications measures that can help, let's say, achieving the objectives we were mentioning before, and we certainly have done a very bold move with the Pharma package, reducing the time for assessing, going to the market, let's say, earlier, everything that is related to creating an environment that is conducive to, that attracts or that supports industry to remain in Europe. But we are doing that because certainly just the legislation is not enough. Guido, as you were mentioning before, look at the way in which the new MFF proposals has been shaped. It is an approach that is unique in its terms, and when it comes to competitiveness, you see now that you have the entire competitiveness funds that is articulated around policy objectives that are very clear, and health and biotech is a policy window of that. So in a way, you're following up over the political commitment to work in this area. And last but not least, I wanted to touch base on what Valentina was mentioning before. In what we can do, We are not an actor that operates in an island. We are working, and what we propose, it's because, there is a demand, there is a need, but it is an action that not only in the creation of the, let's say, the original proposals, but in the implementations of the proposals, you need to work with those that are the beneficiary of the piece of, or the artifacts that we're doing. And I think that without the patients, without industry, this environment would be a little bit ascetic.
Valentina, can you help us understand what's at stake for patients here? Because I think often the protagonist in these discussions around competitiveness often ends up being industry. But what do the trends we're discussing, declining research activity in clinical trials in Europe, and what the Commission's proposed fixes and things like the Biotech Act, for example, what do they mean for patients? What's at stake here?
So we are particularly in favor of the Biotech Act because we see an opportunity to improve the way clinical trials are delivered and the way access to new medicines can be supported. Of course, we always keep in mind the need not to compromise patient safety. Of course, that's really key for us. But we really believe that there are opportunities for efficiency gains in the way clinical trials are conducted nowadays in Europe. And not much has really been done so far. So really, I would push for a multi-stakeholder approach to work together in collaboration to find those opportunities gains and make it happen. Because there's no time to lose anymore. We understand that for industries, more clinical trials in Europe may easily translate in access to innovative treatments for patients. So we need to work together to make it happen. And we as a patient community, we can also contribute on this effort by supporting awareness about clinical trials, supporting the enrollment of patients in trials that really can bring positive results to those patients that may be enrolled. So there's a lot that can be done. I'm not sure we are there yet because I don't know if it is stagnation or it's lack of understanding that it's really getting urgent and no time to waste anymore. Because the time we start this effort, it will take a few years more to see the outcomes of this effort.
Guido, how would you assess what the Commission has proposed so far in the health package, for example? What do you make, for example, of the Part 1 of the Biotech Act, which is looking at the pharma applications of biotechnology, a very broad field, but it includes some specific proposals designed to make it easier for biotech companies to operate here, to come to market, to do clinical trials quicker. What do you think of the measures they proposed?
Well, I think the Biotech Act is in the right direction. I really appreciate the first part, the analytic part. I cannot agree more. There are numbers, figures, and everything is perfectly on target. What I fear is the difficulties that objectively the Commission will experience in the implementation phase, because as has been already said, there are member states. For example, the clinical trial regulation that was a simplification should be much, much far in having only what is approved at the initial. The country should be, I'm sorry to say, more limited in their range of action. There should be more central approval part. That will certainly speed up the part that is still at the member state level, at the institution level, the single institution where the clinical trials are held. And this the Commission can foster, can propose, can support, can press, but still there is a part that member states should help the Commission in delivering what has been very well described in the Biotech Act. So the implementation will be the make or break it.
Mm-hmm. Marco, the Commission didn't have that long to put together the first part of the Biotech Act. Commissioner Varhelyi made it clear it was an urgent priority for him. His sort of mantra, I suppose, was that there's no time to lose. We heard him say that many times. And he made it clear he expected something before Christmas. Do you think it accomplishes everything you need to do, or is there more to do down the line in biotech, do you think?
For I think the part related to the Biotech Act that it was published in December is clearly a comprehensive approach to address the problems that we are mentioning today. Say, for instance, we were talking about capitals and strategic investments. You know, if we take that 66 of the 67 biotech organizations that we had last year, then they went to the US, you needed an instrument that would tackle the problems of capital as well as part of the act. So not only simplifications measures, not only elements of incentives, but also elements of industrial policies that could help, you know, delivering the elements. One of these is certainly the fact that we would invest on, say, with European Investment Bank, you know, billions for supporting exactly the problem that Guido, you were mentioning before. And essentially, the approach that was taken in the Biotech Act, it is comprehensive, covering from the simplifications to the capitals that you were mentioning before.
There was no, I suppose, in its haste to produce the Biotech Act, there was no impact assessment for the first part, which it must be said is something of a trend under this Commission. Why did the Commission feel confident making this kind of intervention without going through the normal evidence gathering process?
Well, certainly it is, by the way, also very clear from the discussions that we're having today that there was a call, a strategic call, which came not only from, probably it starts with the later report on the analysis of the situations in Europe. And from that moment, you know, the passage until you have the proposals put forward with the measures, as you say, in terms of response, in terms of urgency of the problem, you know, the evolutions of the proposal in itself has not been done, you know, in isolations, but it takes into account evaluations of legislations that we had until then. We do have a very clear understanding of the problems coming from our exchanges with the stakeholders. And, you know, all this, because of the urgency, resulted in the text in December. By the way, there is work on the staff working paper that will come out. So the story continues.
So, well, one of the proposals in the Biotech Act is that the Commission has said it's proposing to give an extra year of monopoly protection for certain biotech drugs, subject to some conditions like them being made in Europe. Parag, the reaction, as far as I can tell from industry at the time, was, I suppose, lukewarm. What do you think of that extra year of intellectual property protection for biotech drugs?
So we were talking a few minutes ago, or right at the beginning, about what it takes in order for Europe or the EU to be competitive. And one of the things that it takes for the EU to be competitive is that there has to be a degree of predictability for the kinds of investments that this industry makes. The cycles that we have are very, very long. You know, from discovery all the way through to development of a drug. And even when most of them are not successful, when they are, you're talking about 10, 11, 12, sometimes more years after that. And then we go through the negotiation with the member states for access to the market so that we're able to commercialize and make the medicine available to patients. So by the time you've done all of that, there's an awful lot of your effective patent life has expired. We see, you know, compared to other parts of the world that are competing really strongly for investment by the sector, we were seeing an erosion of the actual effective period of our patents being shortened to the point where it was getting in the way of making investments. So the extra year, it's definitely better than not having an extra year. It only applies in some very specific situations, so it doesn't apply to every single medicine that you would develop. So there's a lot of conditions attached to it. So I think it's a good step, but it's not sufficient in and of itself to make Europe competitive in the way that we would want it to be.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Europe is generally seen as having like one of the more generous intellectual property systems or regimes in the world. I suppose the pharma industry is known for always pushing, during the pharma package, which was concluded some time ago, the industry was pushing for more, longer intellectual property rights. It's the same here with the Biotech Act. I suppose, given that longer intellectual property rights mean patients pay more for longer, what is the optimal level that industry would be satisfied with? Because it seems like the regime is already quite favorable to industry.
You keep coming back to it seeming favorable. I think what we have to be thinking about here is, I'm not trying to avoid your question, it's just that it's not possible to answer it in that specific way, because every case is a case. And when you talk about different kinds of medicines, the development cycles are different, the effective lifetime you have of the medicine is different. So it's not possible to answer that as a single, this number of months, years, or days would be the right one. I think what we have to be talking, and I also recognize that as a leader of a large multinational pharma company, the kinds of things I can say here are going to sound somewhat self-serving. So I'm aware of that. And so it's not like I or any of us are trying to tell anybody what to do, or what they ought to do, or what they should do. What we're trying to do is we're trying to tell people what it is going to take in order for Europe to be competitive with other parts of the world that do want to attract that same investment. And sometimes I hear people say, well, compared with the US or China, it's more difficult for Europe because we're 27 and they're just 1. And that's true. But it's not like the other parts of the world are sitting there thinking it wouldn't be fair for us to move fast because the Europeans are 27 and we're only 1. They're moving forward very, very fast. And so all of these things that we're talking about, whether it be intellectual property protection or anything else that goes into the decision-making for investments, are all important, and they are important at a European Union institutions level, and they're important at the member state level as well in getting things implemented and getting the innovation when it does come appropriately recognized. That's what we have to do, because that's what the other parts of the world who are competing strongly are doing.
Valentina, are you concerned about higher costs for patients as a result of some of these measures, like the extra year of intellectual property rights?
Indeed, we are really worried about the implications of the potential extensions of the IP protection. And that's because we know this will have an impact on healthcare budgets. For sure, they will increase. And this would further delay access to high-quality treatment for patients in certain countries. So we really live in a context where access to high-quality healthcare is unequal. So this would be even widened. What we support here is the need to mandate those criteria that support the extensions, because we understand that there are some criteria to be respected for the extension to be there. So we advocate for those criteria to be there and to be maintained. They shouldn't be waived. Otherwise, of course, the job could jeopardize the system even further.
Yeah. Marco, has the Commission calculated how much it will cost health systems? How much extra will health systems have to pay to grant this proposed extra year of exclusivity?
Do you want a number?
Yeah.
Well, then I will come back to you.
Okay. I only say that because obviously the lack of an impact assessment, that's where we would have expected to find that kind of information. And I think patient groups, the payers of medicines have been critical of the Commission for coming out with a proposal that would appear to be quite expensive for health systems, but they haven't told us how much it's going to be. And that only highlights, the criticism of lack of an impact assessment. I mean,
okay.
Guido, what do you think about this apparent tension between the interests of patients, Europe's solidarity-based health systems, and the need to reignite the competitiveness of European industry, which I suppose that this discussion we've been having, that's what it comes back to, and it's a debate that re-arises on all sorts of specific technical points. How would you advise policymakers to navigate that tension, if indeed you think there is one?
Well, I wish I have the solution. However, I see we are talking basically patient access to innovation, to health, generally speaking. I would see few problems that already emerged. One is the price conundrum, what will happen. The second is the acceleration of the proposal of innovative medicine, which come at the highest cost, whatever is new. There is no single remedy, but we have to develop an overall strategy for Europe. First, we have to promote innovation. If you produce innovation here, there is the simple difference between selling and buying. If you produce, you sell your innovation outside, and you don't have to pay the innovation coming from outside. Then you have to really have a way to measure the value of the medicine. So we always buy medicine under uncertainty. I'm talking as a previous payer and close to the national payer. And what we have to be sure is that we have all the data to be sure that we are buying health and not medicines. We are allocating the resource properly, in other words. And that's why we really are very happy about listening Marco about the data space and the data, because we just have to produce immediately the data of the performance of what we give to the patient and where we allocate money. Definitely, there will be no budget supporting 56 new drugs coming a year. So we need to find a different way of financing the health. Don't ask me, please, which one.
Okay. It's hard to have this conversation without at least one eye on what's happening over the water in the US. What is the impact of Donald Trump's pharma policies and all of this, Pádraig? I mean, I'm thinking in particular of stuff like the most favored nation pricing, which says in principle that consumers in the States shouldn't be paying more for drugs than consumers in other markets. What impact? What does that mean for consumers in Europe, and what needs to happen now?
So to the first question, what does it mean for patients in Europe? It's too early to say. I mean, this is all very, very new, very fresh. It's moving on. So it's very difficult to say what the concrete impact is going to be immediately or in the future. What we need to do about it, it's very tempting to look elsewhere all the time. But what I think we actually need to do is come back to the things we were talking about up until now, which is see what we can do to make the healthcare systems in Europe thrive, the life sciences universities in Europe thrive, and the life sciences industry in Europe thrive. Because if we can get all those three pillars working well, and not just surviving, but really thriving, then what happens in other parts of the world would matter less. I think we have to focus on our own, the things we can control ourselves. Mm-hmm. And those are the things we've been talking about, which is to create a favorable environment for innovation. And it's not just innovation for pharma companies, it's for diagnostics companies, it's for data, but it's also because I think innovation in many ways is the solution to the problems that we have in the healthcare system. We have astounding people working in the healthcare systems around Europe in really difficult circumstances, because we all know the healthcare systems that we have were not set up to deal with the healthcare problems that we face today. And with the best will in the world, as we try and adapt them over time, we can get better, but it doesn't really get to the root cause of the fact that we're dealing with a vast number of very complex chronic diseases today in a system that was fundamentally set up to deal with acute disease. But we can, by innovating at all levels, we can really begin to attack that problem and get to a point where those three pillars of European health environment, the industry, the healthcare systems themselves, the universities are doing better. We have to look at ourselves and take care of the things we can take care of here.
Mm-hmm. Guido, what do you make of the messaging we've heard at various points in recent months from the pharma industry indicating that prices in Europe may need to rise to make innovation more feasible here?
that would be a wished consequence. It's an opportunity, but it's not a given. So yes, we can transfer some innovation here if we will be ready, if we will be capable to do that. That could be one of the very few positive effects of the price pressure. The immediate consequence will be probably less access and less interest in investing in Europe. So we can have both effects. If we want to have more innovation, we have to produce ourselves. So we have to strive to put together all what Marco said, to have an holistic vision. We cannot count on people coming here to invest in the immediate time, in the actual situation. That's what I expect. But certainly there is a concern of less access for patient to innovation. Yeah.
Valentina, what are your thoughts on the potential impact of what the US administration has been saying, what pharma companies in Europe have been saying in response? What does it mean for patients? I mean, are you preparing for a fight over drug prices in Europe in the years ahead?
Of course, we are monitoring the situation, and there is a lot of uncertainty among the patient communities. There is also little awareness of the real implications, I think. I would say also we do support the idea that patients based in the US should pay less for access to the treatments they need, because it would be unfair otherwise, thinking that they can pay more, why we should pay less. But I think it's for the system to adjust, to adapt. It's for companies to think about new business models. We cannot keep the status quo as it is. It's clear that it's now time really to think about innovative pricing models eventually. So it's not just higher prices that will fix it. We know that already now in the US, the level of expenditure in healthcare is extremely high, and still access is not the highest in the world. So it's not just by paying more that we can ensure access to patients. So I think there is a real need now to rethink about the way pricing models were thought, the way negotiations were taking place. The world is changing. We need to adapt.
Marco, how is the Commission preparing for this changing world? I mean, how does this come to bear? How does this bear on what you're thinking about in the Commission and the policies you're working on at the moment?
I guess that the response was the first, in terms of preparation, certainly the package of activities and actions that we put forward over the past year is significant, and it is oriented to address the problems that we see emerging. Obviously, as part of our exercise, it is not only to come up with the proposals, but also to monitor the situations. I think that we do have a set of instruments that we can use, deploy, to address them, and the way in which this evolves will also inform us whether we will need some additional instruments. But for the moment, you have a package. Now, as you rightly say, let's engage into it at all levels, because you are right. It is not only a matter of proposing it together with stakeholders at European level. You also need the implementations phase for deploying certain solutions and make sure that they translate into the object or the artifacts that promotes innovation. And if I go back to what Guido was saying, this is certainly the case, for instance, on accessing to data, which will then, in any case, for research to decisions in general, will be paramount. And, part of this exercise is certainly address the matter through solutions that works at European level, but you do also need investments in the member states so that they are prepared to, create the right infrastructure to access the data and to share the data in the forms that has been described in the European data space. So this is what we are, here to do, to solve and to help industries and our players to thrive.
Last month, just as we're getting towards the end of our time, the Belgian Deputy Prime Minister and Health Minister, a well-known figure in health policy, Frank van den Broek, he gave what I thought was an interesting speech in Paris, where he said Europe, had traded many of its climate, social, and health ambitions developed over the past 10 years for a strategy oriented towards competitiveness, defense, and security. Now, he was at pains to clarify that he doesn't think of competitiveness and solidarity as rival claims, although I guess the implication of what he's saying is that perhaps many policymakers do, given the cutbacks in health spending, and I suppose that's why he felt it was necessary to point out. I mean, I'm curious to know who agrees with his perspective on that, Park. I mean, is that an accurate way of characterizing the trajectory in European health policy?
So I didn't hear the speech, so I don't know what the context was or what the objective was. I don't think we should be thinking about competitiveness and general healthcare system sustainability as being polarities or as being opposites. I think for the health of Europe and for the health of the citizens of Europe, we need both. It's not that we need one or the other. I think we have to create the conditions so that both can thrive. I don't think setting these things off against each other, even in the short term, never mind the long term, is going to be helpful. Mm-hmm. But as I say, I didn't hear the speech, so I don't know what the rest of the context was.
Marco, what do you think of this narrative that policymaking in general in Europe is drifting too much towards competitiveness and that's losing sight of a lot of the values that traditionally European policymakers have prioritized?
I would probably go along the same message. This is is a view that at the end of the day you promote innovations because you want to get the output of that innovations in terms of taking biotech ATMP into the hands of those who deliver this to the citizens, the patients, and it is the journey that is important to master for us. So I do not see necessarily contrapositions between the two matters. What counts is that we translate science into real products, real medicines for people that actually need to use it.
Mm-hmm. Valentino, are you concerned that we're prioritizing the wrong values in EU policymaking at the moment?
We do see such a risk, actually, but also trust that in the end policymakers will prioritize on the values that also have really made Europe the place it is. And I remember like years ago when Ursula von der Leyen was promoting this idea of the European way of life, I would go back to those principles, and that's what we need to defend. That's why I feel we need to act in a holistic manner, in a multi-stakeholder approach to defend the system we have, making sure that it can even further improve. I'm not saying it's perfect as it is, but there is a high risk that we will lose access to care the way it has been so far.
Mm-hmm. Guido, perhaps I can leave it with you to sum up. Are you optimistic about the future of Europe's life sciences sector?
Well, difficult answer this. Yes, I really have the feeling that I'm not necessarily the policymaker are following the wrong principle and pursuing the wrong target. However, I see more and more that they have to follow the event rather than planning the event because of bigger things happening. Without having yet a strong leadership, a robust system already, but to build the system in this uncertainty, without having no guilty to find, but as a matter of fact, they're pursuing the emergency of the time, and that scares everybody a lot. Them first.
Yeah. Okay, that is just about all the time we have. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining me. Please stay in your seats. We're going to have a stage change, and then up next you will be in the hands of our energy correspondent, the mighty Ben Munster. So thank you all very much, and a round of applause for our panelists, please.
Thank you.